Isaiah leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on the thick stack of reports sprawled across his desk. 11 restaurants, each one a piece of his father's legacy, a vision built from nothing but grit, sleepless nights, and sacrifice. And now it all rested on Isaiah's shoulders. He had once believed that delegating to trusted managers would be enough, that the foundation his father laid would carry itself. But the truth was piling up, one complaint after another: slow service, rude staff, employees quitting without warning. It wasn't just a few bad days. Something inside the company had started to rot. He'd sat through enough meetings to know when people were bluffing. Polished excuses, hollow promises, and numbers that told only part of the story. Logic told him to be patient. But it wasn't logic that stirred him now. It was a weight in his chest, a gnawing guilt that whispered louder each day. Guilt that he'd let his father's work deteriorate. Guilt for the people inside the system, the ones giving their all who were now slowly being ground down. 3 days later, Isaiah walked into one of the suburban branches, not as the CEO, but as a regular guy. A faded polo shirt, worn-out jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low to shadow his face. He'd let his beard grow, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and carried himself with a quiet anonymity. No one at this location had ever seen him in person. To them, Isaiah was just a name in corporate emails, distant, intangible. He slid into a booth near the back corner, tucked out of the way, and watched. Dirty tables sat unattended. Customers waited too long for simple refills. The air felt heavy, not just with heat or food, but with exhaustion. A young waitress with auburn hair pulled into a tired ponytail approached. Her smile was polite but thin, strained at the edges. She was clearly running on fumes. "Hey there, what can I get you?" she asked gently, her voice soft and controlled. Her name tag read simply, Amber. Isaiah ordered a basic meal and a cup of coffee, careful to keep his tone neutral, unremarkable. Amber nodded, jotted down the order quickly, and darted off without a second's pause. He watched her as she moved, not just serving but bussing tables, delivering food, topping off drinks. She barely had a moment to breathe. Meanwhile, the man in the manager's uniform stood idle near the back, scrolling on his phone, unmoved by the chaos. He only sprang to life when a customer had a complaint. Isaiah's meal arrived late, and he knew immediately it wasn't Ember's fault. The kitchen was slow, overwhelmed, and Ember had too many tables. As he took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, his eyes drifted toward the drink station. There, with her back turned to the restaurant, Amber paused, her hand lifted to her cheek. Not a casual wipe, but a subtle, quick motion. She was crying. Her shoulders trembled slightly, the kind of silent breaking that only comes after holding in too much for too long. Isaiah felt something twist in his chest. He didn't know what had just happened to her, but whatever it was, it had pushed her past her limit. Ember pulled herself together quickly. One deep breath, a quick glance in the mirror, then she turned around and walked back into the fray, her expression composed, as if nothing had happened. But Isaiah had seen, and there was no pretending he hadn't. As she passed his booth again, balancing a tray in one hand and greeting a new table with the other, he noticed it again, not just the exhaustion in her movements, but the emptiness in her eyes. This place wasn't just understaffed, it was spiritually drained. The kind of place that doesn't just wear people down, it erodes them. His food sat untouched, now completely cold. It didn't matter. He hadn't come to eat. When Amber passed by again, he gently flagged her down. She hesitated for a brief second, then stepped closer. "You look like you're running this whole place on your own," he said casually, the concern tucked behind his words. She gave a brief laugh, dry and lifeless. "Feels like it most days." Before he could follow up, a voice cut sharply across the room. Amber, table F's been waiting 10 minutes for drinks. Move faster. Isaiah turned to see the same man in the manager's uniform, still arms crossed, still standing like a warden overseeing a prison block. Amber's jaw clenched. She didn't reply. She simply tightened her grip on the tray and nodded, lips pressed in a silent line. And right then, Isaiah knew. What was bleeding the life out of this place wasn't just a lack of staff or long hours. It was the indifference, the coldness, the culture of cruelty that was quietly killing the spirit of people like Amber. As she disappeared again into the flurry of movement, Isaiah's stomach twisted. He had led teams before, guided people through crises. He knew without question that real leaders don't speak to their team that way. One bad manager can break good employees, but a toxic culture, that can dismantle an entire organization. He stayed another hour, watching. Every footstep, every whisper, every sigh became part of a larger mosaic of dysfunction. The kitchen was behind, not because of incompetence, but because it was simply outnumbered. Servers were stretched thin, hustling like they were holding the whole operation together with their bare hands. And Rick, the so-called manager, only barked commands when it was convenient. But what broke Isaiah's heart was the moment a young male server quietly approached Amber at the drink station. "I heard what he said to you earlier," he whispered. "You okay?" Amber didn't even look up. Her hand clutched a pitcher of water like a shield. "I'm fine," she muttered. The boy's face darkened. "No, you're not. He can't keep talking to you like that." Isaiah clenched his jaw, his finger tightening around his coffee cup. Amber let out a weary breath. "I can't afford to lose this job." And just like that, the boy backed off, shoulders stiff, mouth sealed. Isaiah had seen enough. It wasn't just a bad shift, it wasn't just being short-handed, it was deeper. It was systemic. And it was personal now. That response rang out like a hairline crack, thin but deep. The young man frowned. "It's not fine. He shouldn't be talking to you like that." Isaiah's grip tightened around his coffee cup. Amber sighed, her eyes still distant. "I can't afford to lose this job." The young man quietly walked away, but his shoulders were tense, his anger silent and contained. Isaiah knew then this wasn't just about understaffing or a stressful shift. This was rot, a slow, corrosive poison seeping into every corner of the workplace, where trust had been replaced by fear, where kindness had become a liability, and silence was the only mask left to survive. He left without touching his now cold meal, placing a few bills on the table as an unspoken apology for a lunch he couldn't stomach. But he didn't go far. He had a plan. The next morning, Isaiah returned, not as a customer this time, but as a job applicant. The hiring process was alarmingly simple, with barely any screening. They were desperate, hiring anyone who could start immediately. He used a fake last name, and no one recognized him from corporate. By noon, he was in the kitchen washing dishes and observing in silence. The cooks were working hard, but the tension was suffocating. Orders were piling up, and when mistakes happened, Rick, the man Isaiah now knew by name, offered no solutions, only sarcasm and venom. "Unbelievable," Rick barked when a plate was sent back. "You people can't get anything right." Isaiah kept his head down, jaw clenched. His body ached, muscles sore, joints protesting. It had been years since he'd done this kind of labor, but he wasn't here for comfort. He was here to see the truth, up close. When his shift ended, Isaiah wiped his hands and spotted Amber near the back exit, eyes glued to her phone. Her face was pale, drawn, like each shift drained her a little more of herself. He sat nearby, pretending to check his own phone. She didn't look up. "You're new, right?" Yeah," he replied softly. "First day?" She nodded. Welcome to the chaos. Isaiah hesitated, then asked gently, Been here long? Amber exhaled, eyes still lowered. Too long? He said nothing, giving her space. After a pause, she continued. I used to love this job, but since Rick came in, everything changed. People quit constantly. We're always short-staffed. And him? She stopped herself, as if realizing she was saying too much. Him what? Isaiah kept his voice calm. Rick breaks people down, she said quietly, and if you speak up, he finds a way to make sure you don't last here. Isaiah locked that truth into memory. Rick wasn't just incompetent, he was a manipulator who ruled by fear. Amber stood up, offering a faint smile. Anyway, welcome to the team. Then she walked away, leaving Isaiah alone with a quiet fire burning in his chest. The next day, Isaiah returned with a clear plan. He needed to understand just how deep Rick's influence ran. The moment he stepped into the kitchen, he could feel it. Pressure, thick and immediate. They were understaffed. The cooks moved like clockwork, but they were overloaded. Rick's voice rang out again and again, not giving instructions, just assigning blame. A server messed up an order. Instead of calmly correcting it, Rick turned the error into a public spectacle. Isaiah watched closely. No one argued. No one defended themselves. They just worked faster, heads down, fear rising. Then something small happened that chilled Isaiah to the core. A middle-aged cook, weary-eyed, muttered something under his breath while scraping a burnt burger off the grill. Rick heard it. He stormed into the kitchen, stopping inches away from the man. What did you just say? The cook didn't look up. Nothing. Rick leaned in, voice sharp as a blade. That's what I thought. The kitchen fell silent. The cook's shoulders stiffened, his grip on the spatula tightening. Isaiah knew that feeling, the sensation of being cornered with no exit. When Rick finally turned and walked away, the kitchen exhaled in unison. Isaiah saw it clearly now. This wasn't just a poorly run restaurant. This was a toxic environment, governed by fear. And in that moment, Isaiah knew he couldn't wait any longer. The next day, Isaiah returned, not as the invisible dishwasher, but as himself. His shirt was crisp, his slacks ironed, his presence unmistakable. A hush fell over the restaurant as he walked through the front door. Most of the staff didn't notice him at first, but Rick did. And the look on his face said it all: confusion, realization, and finally, cold dread. But Isaiah didn't give him the chance to respond. He stepped forward, into the heart of the restaurant, where the truth was finally going to be exposed. Isaiah stood at the center of the dining room, his voice loud and clear enough for everyone to hear. Everyone, stop for a moment. The room fell silent. Servers froze mid-step. Customers looked up from their plates, and the kitchen crew peeked out from behind the door. Isaiah turned his gaze directly toward Rick. We need to talk. Rick tried to keep his composure, but his posture gave him away. Sir, if you needed to speak with someone, you should have scheduled a meeting. Meeting already happened. Zaire cut him off sharply. I've spent the last 2 days working here. I've seen everything. The air went still. Employees exchanged glances, slowly realizing that the man they'd thought was just a new hire was someone far more important. Rick took a step back, voice faltering. I don't understand. Isaiah stepped closer, eyes locked on him. I saw exhausted staff while you stood by. I saw you belittle people instead of leading them. I saw fear in the eyes of these employees when what they needed was support. His voice wasn't raised, but the weight of it filled the room. This is not how this company operates. Rick opened his mouth, then shut it again. He glanced nervously at those around him before looking back at Isaiah. I was just enforcing standards. By breaking people down, Isaiah's tone sharpened like a blade. That's not a standard. That's control, and it ends today. Rick squared his shoulders, trying to salvage what little authority he had left. You don't understand. You're not here every day. You don't know what it takes to keep this place running. On the contrary, Isaiah replied firmly, each word deliberate. I understand exactly what it takes, and I also understand that you've used your position to turn this place into a nightmare. He turned to the employee. If anyone here has been treated unfairly, now is the time to speak up. At first, the room stayed silent. Then Amber stepped forward, her eyes no longer avoiding contact. Her voice was steady but certain. He's right. She looked from Rick to Isaiah. People quit because of him. We're always short-staffed because no one wants to stay, and the ones who do, they're just trying to survive. Another voice followed. It was the cook from the previous night shift. I've been here for years. It didn't used to be like this. Soft murmurs of agreement rippled through the room like a wave. Rick turned pale. The confidence drained from his face. He was exposed now. Isaiah didn't let the silence linger. Rick, as of now you no longer work here. Rick shot to his feet, ready to protest, but Isaiah turned calmly to a senior staff member nearby. Call HR. Begin termination procedures immediately. Rick stood frozen, then stammered. You can't just... I can, Isaiah said, and I just did. His voice was final, irrefutable. Rick stood there, stunned for a moment longer, then quietly gathered his things and left without another word. The room remained quiet. Isaiah turned back to the team. Starting today, everything changes. We're hiring more staff. Management will be restructured, and this will become a place where people want to work, not one they're forced to endure. No one clapped, but they didn't need to. What filled the room wasn't celebration, it was relief. Ember looked at Isaiah, and for the first time, her eyes weren't weighed down by fatigue. They held something different. Look. Isaiah nodded at her and walked toward the back. There was still work to do. Isaiah stayed until late that night. The energy in the restaurant hadn't fully settled, but something in the air had shifted. Conversations were softer, movements more measured, not from fear, but from the cautious belief that maybe, just maybe, things really could be different. He gathered the team in the back, his tone calm and deliberate. After the storm they'd weathered, what they needed now was clarity. Isaiah laid out the next steps. New management was on the way. Hiring would be prioritized, and corporate would begin hosting direct feedback sessions with employees. No one would ever have to endure another Rick again. Some nodded, others remained silent. He understood. Trust isn't rebuilt in a single moment. It's earned back with time, consistency, and action. Amber lingered after the meeting. She stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, but her shoulders were no longer tense. Isaiah motioned for her to stay, and the two of them stepped into the quieter kitchen. He asked gently, "Are you okay?" Amber paused for a few seconds before answering. There were no tears, no dramatic relief, just exhaustion. Still clinging tightly after being buried so long. I'm still trying to process everything, she said. There's been so much pressure for so long. Even with Rick gone, it doesn't feel real yet. Isaiah didn't offer empty promises. Instead, he said, this time, the changes won't be just words. We want to know, what do you need to feel safe and supported at work? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. She thought for a moment, then answered, care. I want management to work with the team, not above them. I want enough staff on every shift so no one's pushed to the edge. But more than anything, I want to know that if someone like Rick shows up again, There's a way to stop it. Isaiah nodded. From now on, every employee will have direct access to corporate through an anonymous reporting system. If something's wrong, no one has to suffer in silence again. Amber didn't smile, but her shoulders eased. For the first time, she looked like she believed things might actually change. As Isaiah left the restaurant that night, he knew the job was far from over. Changing one store wouldn't fix the whole system. If Rick had gone unchecked for this long, how many others were out there doing the same thing? The next morning, he called an emergency meeting at headquarters. Every regional manager and senior officer was present. Isaiah didn't sugarcoat anything. He laid it all out. The abuse of power, the toxic culture, the widespread fear. He reminded them this company was built by his father on values of respect and humanity, and those values had been forgotten for far too long. That ends today. The entire restaurant system would be reevaluated, not just financially, but structurally and culturally. Every manager would be reviewed not only based on performance metrics, but also through direct feedback from their staff. Everyone would be heard, and leadership would have to learn to listen. A few people in the room looked uncomfortable. One regional manager hesitantly admitted that he had heard complaints about Rick in the past, but assumed they were just normal workplace frustrations. Isaiah's jaw clenched. That was exactly the problem. Too many people ignored the truth simply because they weren't the ones experiencing it. That's why he had gone out into the field himself, and that's why he was going to change everything at its core. In the weeks that followed, the changes became more than just policy on paper. Stores were restaffed. Toxic managers were either removed or retrained. Employees who had long been overlooked were given chances to step up. Amber was one of them. When Isaiah returned a month later, she wore a supervisor badge. At first, she had hesitated to accept the promotion, but after witnessing the real changes taking place, she said yes. The restaurant wasn't perfect, but it was better. The heavy atmosphere of fear had lifted, replaced by something lighter, more human. Isaiah sat in his usual seat near the back, quietly observing the restaurant in motion, this time without needing to intervene. And finally, he smiled. Amber passed by his table. There was no grand thank you, no dramatic gesture. Just a quiet nod between two people who understood each other. It wasn't a display of gratitude. It was quiet acknowledgement. A silent recognition that she had seen and felt what he had done. For Isaiah, that was enough. He had built this company on the values passed down from his father: compassion, integrity, and a belief that people come first. But somewhere along the way, he had let those values slip, trusting others to carry the vision for him. He had been wrong, and he would never make that mistake again. The executive boardroom at headquarters stretched wide behind floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling city below. Isaiah stepped inside. Across from him, his father's portrait hung in solemn grace, the man who had laid the foundation for everything. It wasn't just decoration. It was a reminder that what's built from the heart can only be protected by the heart. Along the long mahogany table sat regional managers, their expressions a mix of expectation and anxiety. After a month of sweeping reform, it was time to take stock of what had changed. Isaiah waited a few moments before speaking. He didn't want to lead with numbers, but they needed to be acknowledged. Turnover rates had dropped sharply, customer satisfaction had improved, revenue at many locations had stabilized. But Isaiah knew those metrics didn't tell the full story. He wanted to hear from the people who had lived through the change. One of the senior regional managers, a sharp, composed woman in her 50s who had supported the changes from the beginning, was the first to speak. She shared that while staff had been skeptical at first, real actions like additional hiring and on-site support had slowly started to rebuild trust. Next came a younger manager who had joined the company less than a year ago. His concerns weren't about morale, but about operations. Some locations were still struggling to fill positions. He asked if there was a way to accelerate hiring without compromising on quality. Isaiah listened closely. These were the kinds of conversations that mattered, not excuses, but real issues. He assured the team that recruitment would remain a top priority, but emphasized that hiring the wrong people in a rush would create more problems than being short-staffed. Then someone who had remained quiet throughout the meeting finally spoke up. He offered a rare admission. Before Isaiah had gone undercover, he hadn't fully realized how deep the issues ran. Like many others, he'd brushed off the complaints as typical challenges in the restaurant industry. But after spending more time in the field, speaking with employees beyond management, he saw for himself just how damaging unchecked leadership could be. Isaiah nodded. Honesty was the first step toward real change. The meeting continued for another hour with updates from across the regions. Some locations had adapted quickly, others were still catching up. Isaiah wasn't seeking perfection. He was seeking consistency and transparency. When the meeting ended, most of the team filed out. Isaiah stayed behind, reviewing notes. His phone buzzed, an update from a new district supervisor about an issue at another location. Things were moving in the right direction, but the work was far from over. Later that evening, Isaiah visited a restaurant that had been slow to turn things around. He wanted to see it with his own eyes, not just read about it. From the moment he walked in, he sensed the difference. It wasn't suffocating like the first location he had visited undercover. But it wasn't thriving either. The staff moved efficiently, but there was little connection between them. No camaraderie, no spark. The shift manager, a man in his late 30s, was attentive, not neglectful like Rick, but there was no warmth. He gave orders, monitored tasks, but lacked any real connection with his team. Isaiah quietly pulled aside a longtime employee and asked how things had been since the changes. The response was measured, careful. The employee wasn't unhappy, but not exactly optimistic either. They acknowledged that open mistreatment had stopped, but a culture of indifference still lingered. Isaiah took it in. Fixing the visible problems was only the beginning. Cultural transformation took time. He stayed for a few more hours, listening to individual stories. By the time he left, he had a clearer vision of the next step. It wasn't enough to remove bad leaders. He had to cultivate good ones. Leaders who understood what it meant to lead, not from a clipboard, but from experience. That night, back at his office, Isaiah began drafting a new initiative, the Hands-On Leadership Program. Every manager, new or existing, would be required to undergo hands-on training for each role they supervised. They would work in the kitchen, serve tables, handle customer interactions, because if they didn't understand what it felt like to do the work, they had no business leading the people who did it every day. Change wasn't just about removing what was broken. It was about building something better to take its place.